Thank you. Hello. I'm getting over a cold, so I just want to check if the people in the back can hear me if I speak at this level. Great. All right, so you can shout it out if you want, but you can tell me later. I'm curious, what language do you think in? Is it your native language? Or do you, like me, compartmentalize your life in different languages? So I know for me, Afrikaans is my home language, and I pray in Afrikaans, because that's how I learned. But don't ask me to count in any other language than English, because English is, I took school in English. When I stub my toe or trip, it's like 깜짝이야 in Korean. I find that that's a very emotional language for me. My phone is set to Japanese. I dream in French or Spanish sometimes. Yeah, are you confused? Because sometimes I don't know what language to talk to myself in either. And don't get me started on answering the phone when I don't see who's calling. So today I want to talk to you about how my brain got to this point through cultural immersion and cultural shock. So let me introduce myself. My name is Lindie. I'm a product designer and a YouTuber. This is me with the kanji for fuku, and I put a little oka there, so it says fukuoka. This was actually taken in Penang in Malaysia, so it's not actually meant to be Japanese right there. Alrighty, so having lived in 6 different countries, I find it very difficult to answer the question, where is home? And I can relate to a lot of you. Some of you are hafu or fellow third culture kids as well. So I was born in South Africa, and I grew up in Pakistan, France, Dubai, the UAE, and I spent a significant amount of time in Japan, and now I am working in Singapore. Perhaps I can try to, here we are. This is me questioning where home is. Perhaps, lost my place. There we go. So the more languages I learned, the more I realized that I don't need my identity to be tied in with my passport country, because every language I learn and every culture that I interact with forms a unique part of my identity. And I see a lot of you nodding as well. Yeah, that's very true for us polyglots. Perhaps I can try to introduce myself through my logo. Who can spot the different scripts in here? What do you see? Hangul, correct, yeah. Thai? No? Maybe? Latin, correct? That's right, yeah. So I have a Japanese name, Dinko, so it's the lines on the side there. If you write my name in Korean, Botes Lindie, you have the rir in the Hangul and the piup down here. And then the Latin, L and B. So as you can see, languages are such a big part of my identity that if I have to visually represent myself, I try to incorporate those. But actually, I only started getting interested in foreign languages about 8 years ago in my last year of high school. The more languages we speak, the more identities we can flow in and out of. In Afrikaans, we say, soveel tale as jy kan, soveel male as jy man. And we actually got that from the Dutch. And it is, soveel tale als ek kan, soveel male ben ek man. I don't really speak Dutch. That was probably very Afrikaans. So for those of you who don't speak either, it means something like, as many languages I can speak, so many times am I a person. I'm sure you fellow polyglots will agree that with different languages, you may feel like a different person and have kind of a little identity crisis. So let's turn to some comments I got on YouTube about what people think my identity is. Different people living inside her, speaking different languages through her mouth. Dennis says, it's like you change your personality with every language you learn. I agree. Muhammad says people who speak different languages can also change their behavior to suit the culture of the speaker. That's very important. Language and culture are so intertwined. And this person says, my English is lazy, but damn, when I speak German, ich bin ein Chef. All right. I find myself being shyer in English or Afrikaans than I am in Korean. And I find that this is largely due to cultural factors. So the first time I went to Korea, I was watching TV with my friend, and her dad just openly burped and farted. And I was really taken aback. I was like, oh, isn't that rude? But it was normal there. It's a bodily function. It's normal. And every time I tell a Korean friend of mine that my stomach hurts, they're like, 똥 싸러 가, like, go take a poop. And I was so taken aback the first time. I'm like, oh my goodness, like, you don't talk about poo. But it's a different language, and what I as a Westerner might think is taboo is absolutely normal there. Okay, so today, I'm not going to be talking about bodily functions, but I will take you through a timeline of the languages I've learned with a specific focus on Japanese and Korean. I wonder if you can read. Yeah, you can kind of see. So these are the different countries I've lived in and the years, and then the languages at the bottom. As you can see, I took French, Urdu, and Arabic at school in Pakistan and Dubai. I did French throughout my school career, but I'm really nowhere near the level of a native speaker. So even though you could say I've learned French for, my whole life, I've learned it, I can understand it well, but sometimes I struggle to speak. Yet Korean, which I've learned for a lot less time, I feel a lot more comfortable in. So the point I'm trying to make is that fluency it doesn't equate to the number of years you spend learning a language. It's really based on factors like motivation and how much effort and exposure you have to the language. So over here, after 9 months in beautiful Paris, we moved to Pakistan, which is the country second to Japan that has the biggest impact on my life and my identity, perhaps. So we were there until 9/11, when it became a bit too dangerous after the attacks, and we had to evacuate the country. Even though I was there as a very young child, my memories of Pakistan are extremely bright and detailed and vivid. And I was super intrigued by the beautiful Urdu script. It was my first time being exposed to a different linguistic script, because I grew up in an Afrikaans household, and before that it was France. Here's an image that still sticks to me this day. It's beautiful Pakistani truck art. I see some of you are nodding, you've seen this before. The artists really take pride in their work, and it's a combination of calligraphy and art. And being a designer myself, this image still stuck with me. So in my third year of university, we had to do a layout design project for our own autobiography. So if you look very carefully over here, this is actually a piece that came from Pakistani truck art, and it says Pakistan on it. But as you can see here, I didn't know how to represent myself on the cover of my autobiography without incorporating pieces of the different cultures and languages I've been here. So here's a coin from, I can't tell if that is a Korean coin or an Arabic coin. It's been a few years. And if you look on the second page here, I actually wrote my autobiography in Korean, Afrikaans, and Japanese, because those were the 3 languages at the time that I felt were most important to my identity and that I could relate to. From our experiences overseas, my family and I have kind of developed a little Botes family Creole. My dad is a diplomat, so we spent a few years in Japan, and yes, daijoubi shite nani? So in Afrikaans, if you want to make something diminutive or cute, you can add like an I or an is at the end, or a ki. So Lindie would become Lindie ki to make it cute. So daijoubu means like, are you okay in Japanese? But my mom has created her own, I call it Afrinese, Afrikaans Japanese. And whenever she wants to ask me if I'm okay, whatever language we're in, she will say daijobis. And even though we are a fully Afrikaans family, before we eat, we all say itadakimasu. My dad and I like to walk around the stores and yell, "Ye bahut mehenge hai." This is way too expensive in Urdu. And sometimes my dad and I go an entire day speaking our very broken French out in public just to be funny. And there's no other way to refer to my parents' neighbor's cat apart from fekete mochka, which means black cat in Hungarian, because my mom decided to learn Hungarian with me once. Okay, back to my timeline. So high school is around this area, 2010 to 2013. You can see how old or young I am. So high school was an experimental time for me. When people were out drinking and partying, I was like, I want to study languages. What are the most interesting languages I can find? And I tend to learn languages for the strangest of reasons. So the reason I started learning Vietnamese is quite an accident. So there's a Korean band I like called Mot, and I was going to download a song way back before Spotify was a thing, trying to download a Korean song by Mot, but I typed it in English, M-O-T, and Mot means the number 1 in Vietnamese. So lo and behold, I downloaded a Vietnamese song. I had never heard this language before. I was like, what is this strange sounding language? And I was so intrigued by it, and I was like, well, I guess I have to learn it now. I need to know what the song says. Another happy accident is when my mom, my biggest inspiration in language learning, she has all these crazy ideas. A little funny comment, so today, South Africa and Japan are playing each other. I feel very torn, I don't know who to support. My mom knows who to support though, so she wrote, she's going to watch the match at the Japanese embassy in South Africa. She made a t-shirt for herself, and she wrote, "Himitsu desu ga Nihon no ouen shiteiru desu," which means it's a secret, but I support Japan. And she's in South Africa, so I think she wrote it so that other South Africans cannot see and attack her. Back to what I'm trying to say about Korean for free. So my mom opened the newspaper one day and she said, "Lindie, I saw an ad for free Korean lessons. Do you want to try?" I was like, okay, Mom. I thought it was just one of her silly ideas again. But little did I know that going along with this would change my life completely. It was one of the biggest decisions I had ever made. Okay, until now, I've never lived in Korea. But at the height of my French fluency, I had been learning for 12 years. But to get to that same level of fluency in Korean, it took me about 3 to 4 years. And to get to that same level of fluency in Japanese, it only took me about 2.5 years. So how is it possible that I'd been learning French for so long, but I got to that same level in Korean so much faster? It is through cultural immersion and culture shock. And I want you to understand, I don't mean you have to live in the country. I've never lived in Korea. So that is the meat of my speech today, is how do we learn languages through cultural immersion and culture shock? How do you immerse yourself in a culture and a language without necessarily living in the country? So as a high school student, I was absolutely immersed in Korean. I tried to do everything in Korean. Everything. I wrote all my notes in Korean, much to the frustration of my classmates who were like, "Hey, we have a test tomorrow. Can I borrow your notes?" I'd be like, "Sure, go ahead." Like, "Oh, what is this Chinese on this paper?" I would label stuff around my room in Korean. I would change my phone language to Korean. Even though my vocabulary was limited, I would try and talk to myself in Korean. I was eating, sleeping, living, breathing Korean because I was so set on learning this language to fluency. I got so used to writing Hangul, Korean, the script, that it actually started becoming faster for me to write in Korean than it did in English. So here's just a normal page from my notebook in 2014. You can see what's the contents there, but you can see I'm actually writing in Korean because it's just faster than English. And I developed a little shorthand for myself, which in the subsequent years started integrating Korean and, Chinese and Japanese as well. And I'll get to that in a second. Right, so a word I want to focus on specifically is the word for design in Korean is design. That's obviously a word I use a lot because I am a designer. So every time I'm in a lecture or meeting, I need to write this word so many times. So why would I waste time in English like DESIG, right? So I kind of made a little shorthand for myself. If you look, I've taken the first character of the first two syllables, design. I take the tigut and the jiet, and it just becomes DJ. And there's a little real-life example there. This is my travel journal from when I was in Taiwan. Right up there it says Red Dot Design Museum. And just by habit, because it's become so natural for me to write in the shorthand, I've just made Red Dot Design Museum. A lot shorter, saves a lot of time, and no one can really understand my notes, so I can have lots of secrets. Here's another example of my shorthand. I'll just talk about the example on the left. I needed to write, Africa has 18 billion people, 15% of the world's population. So here I wrote in katakana, Afrika, 1 billion, and then this is ren in Chinese, or hito, or in Korean, 15% of, and then yo, or like sekai, population. So this entire sentence has just been shortened to this. So language learning has not just become a tool for me to communicate with different people and make friends, it's also helped me save time and keep the languages alive, because if I'm writing in different languages as one, mixing different languages, it triggers words in my memory. Sometimes I'll be like, ooh, I don't actually know how to write that. Let me look that up. Okay, here's a diary example from 2011. You can see that that was 1 year into learning Korean. I'm actually using a lot of English, and my spelling is atrocious. 2017, still some chicken scratch handwriting, but from keeping diaries over the years, it's become more comfortable for me to write an entire page in Korean. Okay, now you're probably thinking, well, I can't write a diary in my target language if I haven't, learned these words, and I'm still a beginner. But I want to challenge that thought. So even if I've thrown in English here, sometimes I try to write the English word using Hangul so that I'm at least forcing myself to write the script. So even if you're learning Cyrillic or hiragana, if you don't know the word in Russian or Japanese, try and write the English word, but use the alphabet from a different language. You're still at least practicing how to write it, and you can go home and look up that word. Okay, so part of my Korean immersion for myself was to challenge myself to work at a Korean restaurant. So out of desperation, trying to find resources and material for learning Korean in South Africa, I was like, well, let's find a Korean restaurant. Once I became a regular there, the owner was like, you're always here, why don't you just work here? I was like, okay. But, it's not all fun and games. There were lots of ups and downs. So once we had a catering event, and my boss said, oh, we need help. Can you bring someone else? And I was like, okay, well, my Cantonese friend is staying with me, and I'm sure he can help with serving as well. Cantonese obviously looks Asian. So here we are at the catering event at the Korean embassy, and Korean people are talking Korean to him. He doesn't understand a word, and I had to be this white girl who's mediating between Korean and Cantonese and English, and then translate back to Korean for the Korean people, much to everybody's surprise. That was a fun moment, but something a bit different is I was actually banned from speaking Korean at the Korean restaurant. Weird. So my boss was like, you're here to be serving food, and these guests are being distracted by your level of Korean, and you're not allowed to speak Korean anymore. You're going to lose your job. And I was like, but the guests are Korean. Some of them are coming from Korea. They don't speak English. I would like to be accommodating. I'm not, chatting to them. I'm just taking their order. So cheeky me, nobody was going to stop me from speaking my Korean. I listened to him, I spoke English, but I made sure to use Queen's English when I speak to him. Very difficult formal English. And he got so frustrated from not being able to understand me talking to him that he's like, okay, just speak Korean. It's fine. Continue. Okay. So at university, word spread that I was learning Korean, and somebody introduced me to a fellow Korean student at my university. He was from Busan, which meant he had Saturi, a dialect, a very, very strong dialect. So the more time I hung out with this friend, the more my Korean kind of got a bit of a Satturi twang. And I took full advantage of this, and I looked a bit more into the dialect. I thought, oh, this is very charming, this is cute, let's learn a bit more. And I thought, let me try and fool native speakers online. So trying to create resources for myself to learn different languages, one of the main ways that I acquired Korean and Japanese was through calling strangers on apps. So there are language practice apps, and then there are just random apps where you can talk to someone. You don't need to see their face, it's just audio. And I would be connected to a Korean speaker, and I would throw the Satturi out there, 오빠야, and then people would be like, you're not a foreigner, you're lying. And I'd be like, no, actually, I just speak Korean, but I promise you I'm South African. Some of them got so angry, they're like, there's no way you're South African, stop trolling, and they'd hang up the phone. This person, it's a screenshot from my YouTube. You can watch the video if you just type Lindie Botes in YouTube, you'll find this video. Someone says, oh, I thought you were a Korean living in South Africa. So I did have some fun trying to fool people, but it wasn't always happy moments. Talking to people on the internet, you will have risks. You might see things you don't want to see. You might encounter a bit of racism, actually. Just saying that I'm from South Africa, people would be like, oh, put down the phone completely. And I found that quite hurtful. And for a while, I got a bit sad, and I didn't want to learn Korean anymore. I applied for a scholarship in my last year of high school to study in Korea. And the year that I was going to fill out the application forms, Korea had removed South Africa from the list of eligible countries. And a lot of these factors, I was just feeling very down, and I'm like, why am I trying so hard to learn this language if I'm not seeing results, and this is how people are going to treat me? But the more I was away from Korean, the more I started missing it. And I felt this has really become part of me. It's almost become a part of my internal dialogue. And I just couldn't separate myself from this language. So much so that about 2 years ago, yes, some of you have seen this. The entire Korean media has seen this. 2 years ago, I had to go for a small procedure at the hospital, and I had to undergo anesthesia. Waking up from my dopey state, being half conscious, I was in South Africa, completely English Afrikaans environment, and I spoke Korean to the doctors and to my friend. My friend thought this was weird, and she recorded me. Obviously, I wasn't knowing what I was saying, so after I wanted to watch this and translate it. Back then on my YouTube channel, I only had about 2,000 subscribers, and I thought, I'm gonna upload this video so that we as fellow linguists and polyglots can talk about what is this phenomenon? Why am I, an Afrikaans person speaking Korean in this state of anesthesia? I uploaded it to my tiny channel. It is currently sitting at around 5.9 million views. I've grown to maybe 150,000 subscribers since then. And I'm afraid I won't be able to be taken seriously in Korea, because if you Google my name, this is what you see. Or how about this article? Foreigner swears in Korean under the influence of anesthesia. I don't swear. I don't like to swear, but I was in pain, and Korean is just what came out. So I don't know if I'll ever get a job in Korea, because this is what happens if you Google me. All right, let's move on to Japanese. So my parents lived in Japan for 4 years, and I was at university then, but every university holiday I would visit them in Tokyo, and I thought this is a great opportunity for me to learn Japanese. So every weekend, my dad would bring home the Japanese Times, and I would very meticulously copy down the section that teaches you kanji, and I used very traditional methods to learn Japanese. I would go to a lot of art exhibitions and galleries and take the free pamphlets they have, go home and meticulously translate every single word. But once I got tired of books and translating things, again, I turned to the internet. Here's an app called Psychosom. It's you can download it if you like. It's a Japanese app where you can call people. You also don't need to show your face. And that is where I got a lot of my Japanese practice in. This video is also up on YouTube. This is a few years after I started learning Japanese, but I wasn't yet fluent. And I use this app as a way to progressively learn Japanese. So what I'm talking about is, let's say, for instance, I didn't even know how to say moshi moshi, which is the greeting when you answer the phone in Japanese. So when I'm connected to someone on a call, the first thing they will say is moshi moshi. And if I don't know what that means and I keep hearing it every single time, then I'm like, oh, okay, since I hear it when you answer the phone, now I know that is the phone greeting. Then I repeat that back to the next person. Because nobody can see my face, no one knows who I am, I'm not afraid to make mistakes. The next question would usually be something like, nansai, how old are you? If I didn't know what nansai meant, I would just repeat the question back to them. Moshi moshi, moshi moshi, nansai. Nansai. Then they would say a number, and I'm like, oh, they're saying a number. Okay, this means how old are you? And that's how I progressively learned Japanese, by just, repeating stuff back to people and seeing what they reply with. Once I got a little more comfortable and conversational, I switched to the broadcast feature. So the screenshots here are on where you can have a little radio show on the app. And I started broadcasting every night, so much so that I had regular listeners. And we would talk about everything from language learning to life in South Africa and life in Japan. And because no one could see my face, I really felt comfortable and safe. It was a safe space for me to make mistakes as well. But Japanese, as I've experienced with Korean as well, is not always fun and games. And my parents also experienced a lot of linguistic faux pas and mistakes when they were living here. So my mom was shopping for groceries, and she accidentally said, "Are you a tuna?" instead of, "Is this a tuna?" And unfortunately, I don't think she told me the end. I hope she didn't eat it, but she opened a packet of silica gel, the stuff that keeps your food dry. It was dyed black. She thought it was a goma, black sesame, and she poured it over her rice. So my parents have been through their fair share of linguistic difficulties and cultural shocks. For me, in Japanese, cultural shock does not always necessarily mean I'm struggling with a language, but it can come in two other forms. The first one is exhaustion, where I feel I've been trying so hard to use this language, and I'm struggling, it's a different script, and maybe it's just easier to give up and pretend I just speak English. And it's easy to do that in Tokyo. You're just like, oh, I'm a tourist here, I'm just gonna speak English. And I use that technique sometimes at the end of a very long day, where I was just like, I'm trying so hard, but exhaustion is real. We can't always be performing at our best. We're natural people. We're not like Professor over here who could study for 13 hours a day. That's very admirable, but some of us have to pretend we speak only English to just take a break. And the other one is struggling with identity. I've been trying to fit into a society by actively participating in it, but I'm always going to be seen as the foreigner, no matter how fluent I am in a language. I studied information design at university, and part of my degree required us to do internships for design, working at a design company. And my university holidays were very precious for me. It was a time to see my family again in Japan, and I was like, no way am I gonna stay in South Africa and work. The only way out is to study Japanese harder and try to apply for an internship at a Japanese company. So I purchased, I wonder if I put the picture. Yeah, I purchased one of these design annuals. These are published each year, and every page has a portfolio of design works by either a Japanese designer or a design agency. So I bought myself one of these books, and I marked the pages I liked, pretty much all of them, and I sent out 100 emails to Japanese designers and design agencies asking if they had positions for an internship. I received about 30 emails back, 5 interviews, and at the end I was able to intern at 3 different companies. So while I was sending these emails, it was actually quite un-Japanese of me at the time. So I had only been learning for about 2 or 3 years when I started applying for these internships, pretty much beginner. And I didn't know that there was something like keigo, honorifics, I didn't know that it's rude to say gaijin and not gaikokujin. So this is super embarrassing, and I don't know if I should even say it, but the title of one of my emails was Gaijin no internship dekimasu ka? I am cringing so much just thinking about that. That for people who don't speak Japanese, that's basically saying like, foreigner internship, okay? I would delete that email and think it was spam if someone sent that to me. But hey, I tried. That's all I knew. I was using all the Japanese I knew. I was trying to create an opportunity for myself where I could learn more. And the more I got into, these embarrassing situations, the more I learned. If I had never sent out such a, awkward email, I would have never learned that that's not how you title an email. I would never have known there's a specific email structure in Japanese. You start with "Osewa ni natte orimasu," please take care of me. I'm in your care for this email thread. And yeah. And interning in Japan, if I hadn't had that work experience, I wouldn't have known the different types of words you use, the keigo, the levels of honorifics, and respect and hierarchy in a company. I didn't even know you have to stand at a specific spot in an elevator. Nevertheless, I made it into 3 different companies over the span of 3 years, and boy, did I have to fake it till I make it in my first year there. It got better later. This is a snapshot from one of my notebooks there. So while we had meetings, I obviously didn't understand every single word, and I would write down the words I'm hearing as we're speaking. I'm taking minutes of the meeting, but actually I'm making a vocab list. But of course, I didn't want my boss to see that I'm writing down vocab words. So unfortunately, it's not in this example, but I would write down the words using Hangul. So I took a Japanese word and I wrote it down in Korean script because he couldn't read Hangul, but that was like a close enough pronunciation. I see someone nodding, yes. And then once I went back to my desk, I would look up that word, and then I was able to use it for the next meeting. One of my clients when I was working in Tokyo was One Piece, the anime. One Piece is also a dress, like a one-piece dress. So my boss asked me on my first day, One Pieceって知ってますか? I was like, One Piece, 服? Dress? Is it a dress? Do you know One Piece? I'm like, a dress? And he's like, no, the manga, the anime. I was like, oh, I'm so sorry. I went home and I found a deck on Memrise with vocab words to do with One Piece. And I had to go home and watch all the episodes. I'd never watched anime before then. A lot of people think that because I learned Japanese, I watch anime. Unfortunately, I don't watch a lot, so I had a bit of studying up to do. But thanks to Korean, it was actually a bit easier for me to learn Japanese. So I would write down the words in Hangul. Here's an example of a JLPT study book I use. You can see that there's a lot of Korean in my notes. I try not to use English in my notes. I want to use as much of the language I'm learning, so try and write exclusively in Japanese. If I don't know the Japanese, I'll use the Korean equivalent. So if the word is similar, like Taitoryo is a president in Japanese, and then Taetongyong is the Korean version. So that's similar enough for me to make a connection. And I'll remember the word easier instead of writing president, because I'll hear it in Korean and know it's easier. And here's another comparison of how similar Korean and Japanese are, both in grammar structure and vocabulary, and how it made it easier for me to learn Japanese. So this sentence means I'm practicing baseball in the park with the producer. 私は野球を公園で監督と練習した. I practiced it. And then the Korean version is 나는 야구를 공원에서 감독이랑 연습했어. So you can see in the green is the word watashi, I, or na in Korean. It's at the start of the sentence. Yagu or yakyu, baseball, is the pink word. Koen or kongwon is the blue word, and so forth. So it's extremely similar in most cases in sentence structure and sometimes the sound of the word. So that's really something that helped me learn Japanese faster. This was my last internship when I worked in Tokyo. And luckily, even though I had these ups and downs, a few mistakes I've made, it was still a wonderful experience, and I was able to help design a package that was then produced in Japan. So this is Kalpe soda, sawayaka raichi, like a refreshing lychee flavor. And it's a kisetsu gente, which is like a seasonal special. So you can't actually buy it anymore. It was just a summer product. But yeah, it wasn't always extremely fun. You know, I made a lot of mistakes, and I really did feel like as much as I'm trying and, you know, contributing to design in Japanese society, I'm always going to be the foreigner. So one of the interviews I had, the boss came up to me and he said, straight up, "You're a diplomat's princess. Has anyone ever yelled at you?" Yeah. So a part of me was just like, you know, I'm trying hard to speak Japanese, but maybe people just always see me as a diplomat's princess. Also, why would you yell at someone in a company? I don't want to work there anyway. But as life has it, I'm now working in, I missed something. Another part of my internships was when my boss gave me my Japanese name, Rinko. My name is Lindie, so Rin. And that really helped me feel like, you know, Japanese people are also trying to accept me into their society, and it was really heartwarming. And contrary to being a diplomat's princess, this was something that made me feel like I'm welcome again. And another part of grappling with my identity and trying to not only study languages, but make sense of who I am as a person and who I am as a designer, was trying to create a lot of my design works in different languages as well. So I challenged myself 2 years ago to do a series of poster designs exclusively in Japanese. So these are from some poems, some song lyrics, some phrases, and every day for the month of August, I gave myself the challenge to make a poster entirely in Japanese. And I think this comes from a deeper place of not just trying to experiment with typography and design, but also honestly grappling with my identity. You know, my parents are in Japan, I'm in South Africa. Who am I really? If I speak the language, I don't feel like a South African, I don't feel like a Japanese person. Maybe designing posters in Japanese is a way for me to express my identity and try and understand myself linguistically and through design. But as life has it, I am actually living in Singapore right now. In February, I packed my bags and moved indefinitely to Singapore. Part of the reason I became interested in Singapore was the wide variety of languages. The national language is Malay. The official languages are English, Tamil, and Mandarin Chinese. And there's a whole bunch of Chinese dialects as well that you can hear. Hokkien, Hakka, Cantonese. And Singlish. Singlish is, yeah, represent. Singlish is one of the reasons I decided to move to Singapore. I find it so charming. If you don't know what Singlish is, it's almost like like a Creole, is that what we could say? A patois, like a street slang, a language. People have different opinions on what Singlish is. But it's a combination of English, Malay, Hokkien, bunch of different languages mixed in. I made a YouTube video that you can watch later where I'm trying to speak some Singapore slang. But quickly, I'll talk about 2 Singlish words I like. The first one is paise. It's Hokkien for, you know, when you're apologizing or when you're sorry for something. And we use it at the office a lot. So if you're coming in late for a meeting, you'll be like, oh, paise, paise, paise. Or the second one is bojo. It is when you're not invited to something and you feel very left out. So when my colleagues go for bubble tea and we all come back with our cups of tea, the rest of the office is like, bojo, why didn't you invite us for tea? And there's actually a meme here. Bojo, Joe, you also never come. So even though I invite you, you're not going to come. So on the topic of identity, Singlish is something that I try to incorporate to feel a little more Singaporean in this environment. I don't want to stick out as a sore thumb and not, you know, understand and adapt to Singlish. But neither am I saying I'm trying to become Singaporean. I'm just embracing something that is unique. My colleagues use it every day. I don't mind making fun of myself. And it's really been a part where I can explore my identity in. You know, what does it mean to be this Angmo, this Caucasian who speaks English? So on the topic of accents are a space for me to explore my identity. So after years of attending an American school in Dubai, I came back to South Africa with a very strong American accent. And on my first day at school, at my new school, I walked into the home language Afrikaans class. And my friend said, "You're in the wrong class, you don't belong here." And I'm like, eintlik is ek Afrikaans. I'm actually Afrikaans. And she was like, "Oh my goodness, but you have an American accent. You're not South African." And just because I had a different accent speaking English, people didn't believe that I was Afrikaans. And, you know, being the tender age of a high school student and wanting to fit into an all-girls school, you know, with our cliques, I was like, man, I have to do something to fit in here. I was sticking out like a sore thumb. I was this foreigner back in my own country. So what do? I try and adopt a South African accent. Let's get rid of the American accent and let's be very South African. So everything was gif, everything was cool, and I like to have a good jol. I like to have a good time. So I kept my ears very open. Growing up in an Afrikaans household outside of South Africa, we never used these slang words at home. So coming back to South Africa, this was a cultural shock for me. I had never heard these words, and I was like, I have to assimilate. Let me learn all of the South African slang. So yeah, playing around with accents and trying to explore different parts of accents and identities helped me, you know, question myself and try to understand myself better. But let's turn to YouTube again and see what people say. I'm so curious where you're from. Your accent is so interesting. You sound American, but Aussie, but British. You sound like a mixture of Irish and Northeast English. I can't detect a South African accent at all. I have the same facial expression as Scotty over here, very confused. Why do you have an American accent if you're South African? Okay, Kyle. I love how you have in-between accents all over the place, and it's fascinating how your accent and inflection changes on certain words. Those last two comments kind of worry me, because if you're trying to spot if someone has a fake accent, the first thing that gives it away is when they say the same word in two different pronunciations across a sentence. So, oops. But yesterday I was talking to Richard Simcott, and he was putting on a South African accent, trying to prove something to me. And immediately I said, "Yo, yo," which is a super South African way of saying yes. And he was like, "You just did it. You just switched into total South African mode." And I'm realizing you can be in different mindsets in different spaces. And it doesn't mean I'm faking it. I'm not a fake South African or a fake American. It's just because I heard this really strong South African accent coming from Richard, which is super accurate, by the way. When he was playing around, I was total South African mode, like, yo, yo, yo. So, yeah, I wanted to move away from this toxic environment in high school where people made me feel like I don't belong. I was bullied. People were saying, you know, all you ever talk about is life in Dubai. You don't sound like us. You don't belong here. So I just used my accent to try and fit in again. But I felt a lot more at home in environments that were outside of South African environments. I made friends with the Burmese and the Korean and the Vietnamese exchange students at school, and I would pass notes in class in Korean to my friend, and I was like, wow, you know, this is where I feel like I belong, in a different language, where people are openly welcoming me and not rejecting me like people of my own language sometimes might do. So language learning has always been a very safe space for me to discover who I am as a third culture kid, not really fully belonging in South Africa, not really fully belonging somewhere else, and that's okay. And of course, you know, on the internet is where I met a lot of you. So many familiar faces here, and it really warms my heart that we have this really welcoming, loving, encouraging language community. It's been a space where I can understand who I am, not only as a language learner, but as a person, as a third culture kid. And I want to say thank you to all of you here. Part of the reason I'm here, you know, the reason I'm here at the Polyglot conference is because I discovered some of you on YouTube all these years ago, and some of you are here because you've seen me on YouTube. And I just want to say thank you so much, fellow Polyglots. 도모 아리가또 고자이마시타. 감사합니다.
Baie dankie, dit was ongelooflijk. I heard you talk about applying to 100 different internships and hearing back from only a small handful, and then getting to interview at a minority of those as well. And I know from my own field how that's not at all an unusual success rate as far as hearing back. You did this when you were not fully fluent in Japanese, and what I'm wondering is, A, how you demonstrated to them that you would nevertheless be able to hang and learn and that, you know, all of that stuff, and also how you were able to conduct yourself in interviews without being fluent, especially with some of the terms of the art.
Yeah. I'll start with the second point quickly. Because it's the field of design, a lot of it is also based on your design skills. So if I had a portfolio to show and if that was up to standard, that was maybe half the door open already. Obviously, learning a language, it's also learning culture. So I was aware of some of the customs, you know, levels of politeness and respect. And I made sure to just be on my best behavior in an interview, you know, to bow, to hand my business card over with 2 hands under their business card. I had looked up and researched these things before. The first question, how do I prove to them that I am capable? I was just honest. I told them I am still learning Japanese. I am still a university student. I'm still learning. This is an opportunity for learning, and I would like to learn from you. I was humbling myself and saying, you know, I'm not trying to be someone who I'm not. I would like to know if you would accept me, you know, almost as your mentee. Yeah. Oh, and also I did look up a lot of vocabulary related to design. I would sit up late nights, and you can't really find a word list online for like design terms in Japanese. So I bought design magazines in Japanese. I went to art exhibitions. I went to design exhibitions. I looked up these words. I wrote them down, and I created a collection of words related to the field that I could use to my advantage when I was in those situations.
Okay, thank you very much.